Mike at it.
Hey, Mike.
I gonna lead the topic on employers, but we kind of talked about how sometimes we can get bogged down in these chapters, and especially with something like the wives, we end up talking about how we messed up the family and all the mistakes we made, like for 5 months, and then we'll move on into the next one. But what we tried to do tonight is we talked about maybe letting me hit the high points and having some salient points of discussion out of the chapter and not fall into the trap of negativity that can be so prevalent, especially in these chapters, the wives, the family afterward, and the employers. But I want to start with one quote that really encapsulates the entire chapter. And it's on page 148, and it really summarizes the entire chapter if we look at it in the context of simply being an employer. But after I talk about this, we're going to switch gears and try to look at the chapter in a more broad sense, in that it is full of life on life's terms and practicing these principles in all of our affairs. And we're going to just kind of push the title aside and look for the lessons, because especially with wives, family afterward, and employers, we can pigeonhole the discussion and limit it to what just the title is, and our mind can't expand into the real lessons that these chapters have. And you'll know what I'm talking about when I move on into it. 148 talks about, it boils right down to this: no man should be fired just because he is an alcoholic. If he wants to stop, he should be afforded a real chance. If he cannot or does not want to stop, he should be discharged. The exceptions are few. Now see, that encapsulates the entire chapter about the employer having an obligation to have some empathy and try to have some understanding amidst all the misunderstanding, that he's dealing with something larger than himself, and afford him an opportunity to show he's willing to do what he can to rectify the problem. Now insurance companies and all this, they will allow people to go to places to get better. But Alabama's an at-will state, so that, really it doesn't have to be that way. And the ADA, the government has sort of come off the idea that that alcoholism is a disability. A lot of people were falling into that, and they kind of backed off of that a little. So just remember, Alabama's an at-will state. So if your employer gives you a chance, you should take it, because they're not obligated to keep you at all. Now let's move into the idea that what kind of lessons I can get from this chapter without thinking about the title. I want to start off with telling a little history. A lot of people don't know this, and since we're doing a big book study, I think it would be important, especially since this chapter is the only chapter that's not written by Bill W. 136 talks about, and now I'm going to move through about a page at a time, or every other page through the chapter, so you can follow really easily in the progression of the important points that I have found on each page. I was at one time assistant manager of a corporation department employing 6,600 men. Well, we know that that's not Bill W. This guy's name is Hank Parkhurst. And the reason that he's given such an important honorable mention is because if it wasn't for him, we would not have the big book that's in your hand right now. I'm going to explain it to you. It's not because he wrote it. It's because he knew how to incorporate a business, and they incorporated Works Publishing under the tutelage of Hank P. here, and they sold some shares, and they were able to eventually get enough money to publish this book that you have in your hand. So Hank P. was a very important player. He was also the other atheist that is responsible for, as we understood him in step 3 and step 11. That's another story. I won't go into detail with it, but he was a very important player in the early days. The lesson to be learned from Hank P. is that he could not or would not find this way of life, and he ended up getting drunk, and they bought his shares of Work Publishing back from him, I think for a 6-pack of beer and a sandwich at a delicatessen. I think that was the story in AA Comes of Age, that he was stripped of his ownership rights because of his tomfoolery or whatever. But that's enough about the history. But it is the only chapter not written by Bill W. And the reason he gave him such an honorable mention as to write a chapter is because the very big book itself is in no small part thanks to what he did for us, even though he didn't stay sober. 137 talks about nearly every modern employee feels a moral responsibility for the well-being of his help, and he tries to meet these responsibilities. I sort of covered that a minute ago. I won't belabor it, but when I was learning my big book, there was always certain quotes on each page that I made myself focus on, and this was the one that was on that page. I want to move on because there's so much material. This is real important. A look at the alcoholic, and this is about the positive aspects of us. We can get caught into the trap of talking about what F-ups we are and how we've messed up and all this. But the fact of the matter is, just like it talks about on 21, if you take all the bad parts out, it describes a person who has special skills and abilities, the finest fellow in the world, builds a promising outlook for himself and his family. It talks about here at 139, a look at the alcoholic in your organization is many times illuminating. Is he not usually brilliant and fast-thinking and imaginative and likable? When sober, does he not work hard and have a knack of getting things done? And I have to say that that's true. I think any one of us, when we put our mind to something, we can outwork anybody around us. And I think that everybody knows this. And just think about, if you're new, the kind of progress and things that you can do without that monkey on your back anymore. I think that the sky's the limit. It's been my experience that without having to carry that bag of rocks of addiction and the guilt that goes along with it, that we can accomplish things if we put our mind to it. And this next sentence here from 150 proves that. It says, there are 2 alcoholic employees who produce as much as 5 normal salesmen. And I really believe that. I really believe it's possible. I've seen it. Hell, I've worked myself out of a job. And believe me, the people around you, when you're running circles around them, they're not going to like that shit. So be careful. If you're an alcoholic, just know you can probably outwork everybody around you, but it may cost you. So I'm just saying that as a half as a funny. I'm not saying dumb down and don't try. 141 is real important. Now remember, we're talking about this chapter under the guise of practicing these principles in all our affairs and things that I learn from you people, which when I read a family afterward, I read it in the context of this is my family afterward. If you try that, you'll get so much more out of that chapter. And this one really fits that description if you look at this chapter like that. It talks about a 141. Because a lot of newcomers think that just because somebody's sitting in these rooms, they're walking a spiritual path. And as a newcomer, you're obligated to your thoughts need to be on your new associations, as they say in NA. And I think that's real important. You need to stick with the winners, in other words. 141 talks about, this is not to say that all alcoholics are honest and upright when not drinking. Of course this isn't so. And such people often may impose on you. Seeing your attempt to understand and help, some men and women, we'll throw it out there, will try to take advantage of your kindness. And I think that that's a very, very important warning. And it's saying, hey, there are people who aren't walking this path in here. It's up to me and each individual to stay around the ones that are. Because there are people that will purposely take advantage of our kindness. One of those green chairs right there has the word Pete on it. And the reason it is because Pete used to come here. And that guy Pete would get people in the program to work for him, and he never paid them. He even paid some of them with liquor. I mean, he used the newly found trustingness, and he was a program parasite like there is no other. You don't know who he is. It was a long time ago. But I'm describing, if you look on the back of one of them green chairs, you will see his name. And we booted him from here when he wrote that shit on that chair, by the way. So it can be done if he caused enough trouble. 142 talks about some important questions that I'm to ask an alcoholic. A lot of times, we say we're not supposed to diagnose somebody as an alcoholic. And especially when we're working with someone, what are the questions that I'm supposed to ask them? I've always looked at 142 as having several very important, integral questions that are important to ask a newcomer that you may be working with. It talks about here on 142, But does he want to quit? Will he take every necessary step to submit to anything, to get well, to stop drinking forever? If he says yes, does he really mean it? Or down deep inside, does he think he's fooling you? And each person that works with somebody is going to have to really make an assessment whether this guy thinks he's fooling you or not. I can sniff out some BS in a second. I don't know about some of y'all, but I'm just telling you. You begin to get that knack to be able to listen to somebody for about 5 minutes and tell if they're serious or not. And that's what this is talking about. But one way to do that is ask the right questions. And it talks about it here. It says, does he think he's fooled you? And that after rest and treatment, he will be able to get away with a few drinks now and then. We believe a man should be thoroughly probed on these points. That means these questions should be part of your work if you're going to work with somebody. See how we can get so much more out of this chapter now? We're starting to see. After satisfying yourself that your man wants to recover and that he will go to any extreme to do so, you may suggest a definite course of action. I just want to throw that out there. 142 is the place with the good questions. Go check it out for yourself later. If anybody wants these quotes and page numbers, I have it on my notes in my phone. Simply text me. I'll send it to you. I took all the hard work out of it for you. You can have all the good shit in one little notes here. 143, my favorite quote on 143 is to get over drinking will require a transformation in thought and attitude. And I've always used that. I've always thought it was a great description of what we're trying to do, is a transformation. And I love the number of different ways that Bill W. uses words to say the same thing. Alteration, transformation, change. You know, he's saying there must be a change. 144, after all, are you not looking for results rather than methods? And I always like that quote, and that's a real important quote, because what are the methods that he's talking about? Now we're talking about page 31, aren't we? Where he lists all the methods we have tried. That's what he's referring to. Remember, he wrote the book. He remembered. He just wrote it. So when he says, look at all those methods, switching from Scotch to Brandy, doing it on after work. Many today, there's probably a lot more methods that people try. But the important and operative word in this sentence is, aren't you interested in results rather than methods? This way of life is not a method. This is a way of life that can lead to results. It's not some trick. That's my point. That's what he's trying to say. Aren't you tired of trying to trick this thing? And actually, let's do something about it. I think that's the lesson that I'm to get from that. 145. Now, this is very important, which could take 10 minutes by itself, because it talks about on 145 the greatest enemies, and a lot of times we hear that resentment's the number one offender. And if I talk a little long, forgive me, but we're covering an entire chapter, and I'm not going to half-ass anything. Okay? Hope you can appreciate what you're hearing here, because it's taken a long time to get this, to be able to do what I'm saying. I know I'm talking a little long. We're almost done. It's okay. And then we're going to talk about anything. Everybody heard something different. I touched on a bunch of different points, and each person may, so then we can ensue a discussion. Over and above, I fucked up my employer and I'm a piece of shit. We don't even want to talk about that, because we see that it's so much more than that now. It talks about it here. The greatest enemies of us alcoholics are resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. Now, we hear of resentment being the number one offender, but when Bill says the greatest enemies, I need to step up and take notice. And what he is saying is, once I get off the sauce, the feelings of life that I often used over, that I often drank over to try to push deep down within myself so I wouldn't have to feel them, those are going to come up. And I'm going to need some tools to learn how to deal with them. Now, back on 37 is where this dovetails. The connection with this statement is going to be, on 35, where it talks about sometimes we go out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, worry, anger, depression, jealousy, the like. And even in these beginnings, we have to admit that my justification for a spree was insanely sufficient in the light of the havoc the drinking bout creates. So see, what it's saying is dovetailing all those feelings: nervousness, worry, anger, depression, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. Feelings that human beings have, not just us. We have them in spades, but the point is that we go get drunk and kill ourselves over that shit. So that's why he says they're the greatest enemies. And I have to be prepared as a newcomer to stay close to this program, stay close to safe people, Make those assessments that we talked about from 141. You can go look back on that quote. So I won't belabor any more the greatest enemies. The last quote here is 146. An alcoholic who has recovered but holds a relatively unimportant job can talk to a man with a better position. Now, you're going, Mike, I thought we weren't going to talk about employers. This has everything to do with you working with somebody in here. And what did this just say? Everybody is equal in here. From Yale to jail, from Penn State to State Penn, there could be an old man that you meet at a meeting. He don't have a high school diploma, and you've got 10 master's degrees. But if your ass is drunk and he's got 5 or 10 years sober, he could help you. That's what this statement says. A man who has recovered, who's worked the steps, but holds a relatively unimportant position, can talk to a man that rest of the folks would say is above him. But he's not really above him in him, because we got to shuck away all those judgments. So if you're new and you meet somebody and you are sober and they're not, it don't matter if his bank account's 1,000 times bigger. If he's got more education, you have something to offer. That's what I'm trying to point out. That if you're sober, you can help somebody that's not as far along on this path. So it's going to be hard for me to recap, but I'm going to recap really quickly and end this. We talked about the main purpose of the chapter was for the employer to have some understanding and give you a shot, but it's up to you, because he don't have to keep you on. We talked about how Hank P. was an important guy, and he wrote this chapter, and he gave him the opportunity to write this chapter because you wouldn't have this book in your hand without him. I won't go into that. You already heard me say it. Okay? And we talked about how we're fast thinking and imaginative and have special skills and abilities, and 2 can outwork 5. We talked about how we are very good workers. We talked about beware on 141 that not everybody in the rooms is working a step, and make those assessments and keep those safe people in your life. We talked about 142, of course, all the questions that you're supposed to ask when you work with someone. Remember 142 next time you work with someone. Thoroughly probed on these points, it says. I got to know the points. 143, the transformation. 144, results rather than methods. Remember, we're not just tricking this thing. We're not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. This is a way to get permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's from the book. 145, we talked about the greatest enemies, the feelings of life. Be ready. They're coming, but you can get through it. Everybody in here that's got time has gotten through it. Like Charles, even hard things, deaths in families, divorces. You can get through these things that you would drink for a fraction of, sober. And that's when you can have a message to carry to somebody who has not yet gone through anything. That's why this thing works. Talks about 146. Anybody can help anybody. It's real important. There's no big me's and little u's or whatever the phrase is. So I know I've talked about a lot, and I know I've talked fast. I've got a bad habit of talking fast. But I've covered these pages, and you've had the book in front of you. If you heard something you want to talk about, let's talk about it. But let's stay in the solution and not beat ourselves up like a lot of times when we talk about this chapter we're liable to do. Okay, I've had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, and I'll pass.